Hi there, friends from around the world. Welcome back. If this is your first time here, we're honored to have you, and we'd love your likes and subscriptions. Now let's get into it. We're hearing a lot of criticism from Putin, if you want the truth. He acts polite most of the time, but in reality his words are meaningless. Putin has been disrespecting President Trump all along. He thinks he can manipulate him. But I don't believe he can control Donald Trump. You saw what happened with the Iranians. Trump gave them a 60-day deadline, right? They pushed it to 61 days and he took action. I think Trump has come to the conclusion that it's time to ramp up the pressure on Putin, and that includes continuing support for Ukraine. Trump and Putin had a recent call, and while we don't know the full details, Trump doesn't seem happy. He's doing everything he can to wreck the Russian military and economy. Let's start with the military. Just a couple of days ago, reports were saying the U.S. was temporarily holding back some aid to Ukraine. Weapons and ammo they desperately need. Well, guess what? That's all changing now. And the source of this change isn't some anonymous White House insider, it's Trump himself. Listen to what he said. Before a Monday dinner with the Israeli Prime Minister at the White House, President Trump told reporters he plans to send more defensive weapons to Ukraine, even though the administration had just announced they'd pause shipments after reviewing military spending. Trump said, "We're going to send more weapons. We have to. They need them to defend themselves. They're taking heavy hits. We'll have to send more, mostly defensive weapons, but they're getting hit hard. That's a fact. A lot of people are dying in this chaos." Right after Trump made this announcement, the Pentagon released a statement confirming they've started providing more defensive weapons to Ukraine to help them protect themselves. Of course, this is bad news for Putin, and unfortunately for him, it doesn't stop there. Honestly, I've been following this war since day one, and today might be the happiest I've felt about the news. What Trump said last night about Putin, I'm pretty sure folks in the Kremlin are freaking out. Now, before we get into that clip, as always, hit the like and subscribe buttons below. It's pretty clear the call between Trump and Putin didn't go well for Russia. We don't know exactly what was said, but judging by their history, we can guess what ticked Trump off. Remember earlier this year, Russia promised to stop attacking Ukraine's energy infrastructure, and Ukraine agreed to do the same for Russia's. Just 2 hours after that call, Putin started bombing Ukrainian oil refineries and power stations. Clearly, Putin doesn't keep his word. Same thing happened a few months later. Ukraine agreed to an unconditional ceasefire, but Russia said, "We won't agree to a ceasefire. We want peace, but we won't stop fighting." And I believe the same thing happened in this recent call. Putin said he'd stop attacking Ukrainian civilians, and hours later, Russian missiles hit shopping malls and apartment buildings in Ukraine. It's crystal clear. Russia is deliberately targeting innocent civilians because it knows it can't win on the battlefield. And it's not just me saying this, or Ukrainian officials. There's actual data backing it up. This is a chart showing Russian drone attacks inside Ukraine. As you can see, those attacks have increased this year. And while Russia pretends to be negotiating with Ukraine and the United States, the drone strikes just keep rising. Trump took office at the end of January, and except for April, these attacks have gone up every single month. Actually, last month was one of the worst months for Russian air attacks since the war started back in February 2022. That's when Putin launched what was supposed to be a 3-day special military operation. But out of all the major strikes, 5 of the worst air attacks happened in June 2025. Russia is not just keeping up its efforts, it's seriously ramping them up. And that's exactly why President Trump is saying what he's saying. Let's hear him out. Welcome back to Sunday Night in America. Vladimir Putin isn't listening to Donald Trump, and that's a big mistake. We had a long phone call. We talked about a lot of things, including Iran, and we also discussed the war in Ukraine. And let me tell you, I'm not happy about it. I'm not happy about the lack of progress with Ukraine. Did I make any progress with him today? No, none at all. Putin is not interested in peace. He's interested in Ukraine. He wants to rebuild the Soviet Empire, something we've known since day one of this war. That's why President Trump promised Zelensky more Patriot missiles. Now, some people aren't thrilled about the details of that promise. During a 4th of July phone call, Trump promised to send 10 Patriot missiles to Ukraine. That's less than the 30 interceptors that are currently idle in Poland. But he also promised to help Ukraine find more sources. At this point, critics are saying this feels like 2 steps back instead of 1 step forward. We're back where we started. But they're missing the bigger picture. Think about what happened recently with Iran and Israel. The U.S. used up a huge portion of its Patriot interceptors to defend Israel from Iranian ballistic missiles. That's why the U.S. stockpile of Patriot missiles is now down to just 25% of what the military needs. We're literally running out of Patriot interceptors, and this is one of those moments where hard choices have to be made. Ukraine desperately needs them to defend against brutal Russian attacks. But the U.S. military also has a duty to protect the U.S. first. In a worst-case scenario, we can't afford to be without interceptors. That's exactly why weapons shipments were paused after a routine Pentagon review. Here's what the press secretary had to say. Can you explain the decision to pause weapons deliveries to Ukraine, especially while Russia is bombing cities and civilians there? Was this a presidential decision or the Pentagon acting independently? No, it was neither of those. I'm happy to explain. This was a routine global review by the Pentagon of all weapons aid and support the U.S. provides, not just to Ukraine but worldwide. When the Secretary of Defense took office, he ordered this review to make sure everything we provide aligns with American interests. So this is a temporary pause for evaluation, to ensure everything the Pentagon sends out is in the best interest of our military and of the men and women in uniform. Obviously, this isn't an ideal situation. We want Ukraine to have everything it needs, not just to defend itself, but to win and push Russia back. But again, this is a tough call. And for the U.S. military, America comes first. If we're forced to choose, and I wish we weren't, it has to be America first. Luckily, Trump is helping Ukraine get more Patriot systems through other means. For example, the day before German Chancellor Angela Merkel asked Trump to release the stored Patriots, she offered to buy systems from the U.S. and send them to Ukraine. Trump suggested that Germany send one of its own Patriot batteries and split the cost. Now, if Trump really didn't want to help Ukraine, he could have just said, "You send it, I'm not getting involved." But instead he said, "Why not send a German battery and we'll help with the cost?" That shows he does want to help. It's just that the U.S. doesn't have enough weapons to spare right now, especially Patriots, which Ukraine needs the most. Trump's worried about America's missile reserves. The U.S. Secretary of Defense is also concerned, reviewing systems in Germany and Greece to possibly redistribute them. The White House expects Europe to step up as well. Trump's tone clearly shifted after 2 recent phone calls, one with Putin, who, by the way, launched a missile barrage on Ukraine just hours later, and one with Zelensky, which, honestly, both sides called their most productive call so far. A Trump aide told Axios that Putin acted like a fool in that conversation. Trump said he doesn't want to be blamed for the war, but he's fine with sending defensive weapons like Patriots on the other side. Russia isn't happy with Trump's decision. Former Russian president and current Security Council member Dmitry Medvedev had a full-blown meltdown on Twitter after the reports came out. He said he didn't care at all about Trump's decision to send defensive weapons to Ukraine. Though he cared enough to write a whole post about it in his post, he mocked Trump for flip-flopping, saying, "I'm happy with my call with Putin, but I'm disappointed in him too." The reason for the tone shift? Putin launched an attack on civilians just hours after their conversation. Bombing apartments and other civilian sites in Ukraine, Trump responded accordingly. He never said he wouldn't send new weapons. Those are just rumors. In fact, Trump has said he would send weapons. So let's not take Russian posts at face value. Russians are used to lying. How do we respond to all this? Same way we always do, like our soldiers, like our commander-in-chief. We don't respond. We stay focused. We keep pushing toward our goal, reclaiming our land, and winning this war that Dmitry Medvedev talks about. Still hasn't come. That 3-day special military operation is still dragging on, years later. But that's not the only bad news for Medvedev and the Russian leadership. Trump is also going after the Russian economy, just like he's going after their military. He's backing Senator Lindsey Graham's new sanctions bill, which will target countries that support Russia. Here's what Trump said. "Do I want Lindsey Graham to pass the Russia sanctions bill? Yeah, I do. I'm looking at it. Yes, very strong sanctions. I'm looking at it." We discussed this sanctions bill in detail a few weeks ago with Russian expert Jason Smart. Let's revisit what this bill is and why Russia is so worried about it. Basically, Russia is relying on Iran and North Korea for weapons and soldiers, and on China and India for money, to fund the war and pay for weapons. But if this new Senate sanctions bill passes, everything could change. Right now, the bill has support from 81 of the 100 U.S. senators, so it's almost guaranteed to pass. Here's what it does. It places a 500% tariff on anything imported from Russia. Uranium, oil, natural resources, you name it. This hits China and India the hardest because together they buy 85% of Russia's exported oil. But China and India trade with the U.S. 10 to 15 times more than they trade with Russia. So from a purely economic point of view, losing access to the U.S. for cheap Russian oil just isn't worth it. Especially with China already struggling economically, this pressure could break them. If this bill passes, it could change the course of the war completely, possibly within just 2 weeks. It's a big deal, and it has bipartisan support. It's expected to pass easily in the Senate and the House, which means it could become law without even needing the president's signature. This conversation took place a few weeks ago, but that bill is being voted on tomorrow, Wednesday. This bill sends a clear message to Putin. Your lies and your violence are a losing strategy. The American people won't tolerate being lied to by a murderous dictator forever. Thanks for watching. Please support us by liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. Stay tuned for our next